Hey folks! For over a year, a beloved PS1 classic has been waiting on my shelf to finally be played. Parasite Eve. If I had to describe this game in a few words, I'd call it a monument to the incredible Squaresoft from the 90s, capable of creating outstanding and even experimental games. Parasite Eve is an original mix of RPG and survival horror, which is why it is often referred as the Resident Evil RPG, and its story is inspired by the novel of the same name, to which it serves as a sequel. The story, in short, revolves around protagonist Aya Brea, a New York police officer who finds herself battling a supernatural entity named Eve, intent on unleashing, let's call it a biological threat on humanity, for now. The story unfolds over 6 days during the Christmas holidays of 1997, and it all begins on Christmas Eve, at the opera, where the heroine arrives with her date. The performance tells of a prince that tries to convince his father to let him marry a witch, and as the lead actress Melissa Pierce begins to sing an aria, something happens. Melissa makes eye contact with Aya, and somehow this triggers the imminent catastrophe. Suddenly, the other actors on stage literally catch fire, and are immediately followed by the audience, who begin to suffer from spontaneous combustion. In the midst of this horrific mess, we see Aya pull out a gun, because, well, you never know, it might come in handy even when you're off duty, then push her date away who mysteriously survives only to never be seen again, and make her way to the stage to confront Melissa. If you're a man of culture and have played Vagrant Story, you'll recognize in Parasite Eve's battle system some similarities. We can say that Vagrant Story's BS is an evolution and total overhaul of this one, with which it shares the range area of Aya's weapons when she enters the attack mode, once when the active time bar is full. The first battle against Melissa is scripted and ends after just a few shots. The actress now calls herself Eve and implies that Aya shares with her a similar power, that she will eventually wake, and follows the first confusing flashback in the hospital. Now, if the game seemed to have no qualms about showing the violent deaths of innocents, prepare yourself for even nastier scenes to follow. See, after descending into this hole, Aya will witness the grotesque transformation of a rat into a horrible monster. Damn, that was wild. In this first dungeon, we'll experience a bit of the game's typical exploration and interactions. We can open doors, search furniture for key items, and even witness another nasty transformation of a parrot, a sign that Eve's presence can change the DNA of surrounding living beings and mutate them into monsters. By the way, we can now deepen a bit more the battle system. First of all, enemies will randomly appear in specific places, and after entering the combat mode, Aya can move freely in the arena, allowing us to evade the majority of enemy attacks, with the right timing and positioning. When the 80 bar is full, we can decide to attack, or access the menu and select for example an item, or the Parasite Energy, which is basically magic. Aya unlocks new spells by leveling up, and consumes mana that gradually refills during combat. The more we use spells during a fight, and the slower the bar will refill. Using ranged weapons consumes ammo, which is stacked into the ammo crate in the inventory. All weapons, except for rocket launchers, use the same ammunition, and also have magazines, whose capacity depends from the parameter bullet capacity. During battles, I may interrupt their attack to reload their weapon, which wastes a bit of time, and can give the enemy a chance to attack her. I've found it helpful to manually reload weapons from the inventory after each battle, so as to have a little advantage for the next one. Also, Aya's inventory is initially very limited, forcing us to drop items or place them inside chests, and the slots can be increased by leveling up or investing bonus points in item capacity. Anyway, this value will not reflect the total number of slots, because after the 10th level, more and more points will be required for additional ones. Back to the plot, Aya catches up with Eve, who transforms Melissa's body into a monstrous being, partially resembling an insect with a gigantic stinger. It's time for the second round, but once again the struggle ends quickly to make way for new revelations, or rather plot elements involving mitochondria, which seems to play a key role in Eve's powers and the manipulation of the beings around her. We'll witness a second flashback in the hospital, and then Aya once again re-enters a hall to chase Eve, now through the sewers, but instead of battling her again for the third time, there's the first boss fight against a mutant alligator. It's not a particularly difficult battle, but too many distractions can result in an easy game over, and furthermore this boss has two parts, and destroying its tail will lead to the second phase of the fight. Once this battle is over, we'll see the end of the whole introduction, with Aya being recovered by her partner in work, Daniel, this large, experienced detective who will have a big role for the rest of the game. Parasite Eve is a short game with a fast pace and intriguing story, in which we'll follow Aya in her pursuit of Eve, who will cause mayhem in New York. We'll visit locations inspired by real-life ones, which will be unlocked on the world map as the investigation progresses. The story stones and themes will be decidedly mature, and there will be plenty of other moments of body horror. Without spoiling anything, the part in the park where the audience melts into a hideous blob is one for the ages. Oh look, there's a cute German shepherd in the district that's getting all the attention. Who knows what's going to happen? Who knows? On the one hand, Aya will try to find and destroy Eve, who is a calamity for humanity, while on the other she will uncover truths about herself and her past, which will explain why she's the only one immune to her deadly powers. The supporting cast includes Daniel and the other colleagues from her district, that will be joined by a Japanese scientist called Kunihiko Maeda, who arrives to contribute to the investigation thanks to his knowledge of a similar past case. Anyway, I won't deny that some plot points haven't aged very well, but all in all, Parasite Eve is definitely a distinct case of adult storytelling and themes in the RPG genre, with a horror plot that draws on scientific theories. Also, believe me, the ending part is surprisingly spectacular and satisfying, with a series of final bosses which didn't disappoint at all. Parasite Eve has a lot of weapons, which are divided into different types: pistols, rifles, SMGs, grenade launchers, shotguns, rocket launchers, and a freaking baton for when we run out of bullets. The first thing you need to know is that some types of these firearms affect the loading of the AT bar differently. The fastest are the pistols and machine guns, the slowest are rocket launchers, and the remaining ones are a bit slower than the first two. A key part of the game will be acquiring and upgrading them, increasing their stats with bonus points, and, above all, modifying them with added special effects. See, by giving Torres or Wayne a mod permit, we can increase the available slots, which can be up to 9 depending on the weapon, allowing us to install what we need. Keep in mind that additional effects can provide very big advantages in many encounters and even boss fights. For example, Rate of Fire allows you to fire up to 10 shots per attack, but keep in mind that each of them will deal a fraction of the weapon's total maximum damage. I think that 3 is a good compromise, especially since otherwise you'll easily waste a lot of bullets. SMGs in particular consume too many, and for this reason I warmly suggest you to decrease it. Installing mods like Quick Draw and especially to commands will be vital in the later stages. The latter in particular will allow you to give 2 commands each turn. That means 2 attacks in a row, or the use of an item and then an attack, or a spell, and so on. Anyway, these upgrades are not a purchasable item. In reality, you can't buy anything in the game. Everything is found in chests, or obtained from defeated enemies, or given by secondary characters. Actually, these special effects are found already installed in weapons, and we have to transfer them from one to another by using the item called Tool. But there's a side effect. The weapons deprived of the stats or the special effect will be lost, unless we use the Super Tool, which is much rarer to find. As the story progresses, we'll find increasingly better weapons. However, there's a way to get endgame weapons, starting on the 3rd chapter. In fact, we'll be able to deliver to Wayne at the district the item called Junk, dropped only by specific enemies. So, how much Junk is required, you ask? 300 fucking units. I discovered this when out of curiosity I looked up what Junk was used for. Well, it would have been better not to find out, because then I got fixated on getting the P90 SMG, which is the best gun in the game. Now, the problem wasn't just having to kill the birds that spawn in Central Park countless times, which don't even always appear, but having to constantly load the inventory. See, one problem with Parasite Eve is that every item in your inventory requires a slot, such as some important keys. And unlike other minor keys that are thrown away once used, these can only be stored at Wayne's, where you can also store weapons, armors and various items, but even storage is not unlimited. Anyway, obtaining one of these fantastic weapons requires many hours, between many random battles of a few seconds, and continuous trips back to the district. But I admit that I abused just a little of the emulator speed up. Yes, I'm always the same fucking spoiled one. And I don't regret it. Back to the equipment, armors have also upgradable stats via bonus points, and slots for special effects, such as resistances against various status alterations, like the Hateful Darkness, that blinds Aya and dramatically reduces the area of attack. And unlike weapons, however, there are no super armors obtainable by collecting junk and the like. Parasite Eve is indeed a short and very intense experience that can last almost 10 hours if you ignore obtaining special weapons and the like. In the first playthrough there's only one optional location called the Warehouse, where you can farm a lot of bullets and fight a boss that drops the rocket launcher. And speaking of difficulty, it's overall a decent challenge, enriched by fun boss fights, like the famous T-Rex in the museum. I have to admit that the overpowered P90 lowered the overall difficulty too much, and I experimented using other various weapons, like the grenade launchers and the shotgun. Anyway, I said first playthrough, because after seeing the ending, you can access the New Game Plus, here called X-Game. Before the final battle, I select to choose an armor and a weapon to engrave, which will be carried in the next run. Yes, that potentially lowers the overall difficulty, but in X-Game mode, enemies are stronger and can give some problems, because I also starts again from level 1. Let's say that the game progresses all the same, but there's a huge addition. From the second day we'll be able to access the Chrysler building, an optional dungeon that counts 77 floors. Now, in my opinion, the Chrysler building is one freaking piece of shit of a dungeon. Seriously, it's tedious like few other things I ever encountered. In short, every floor is composed of randomized corridors, and lot of dead ends. And always in each floor there's a special room where to find powerful weapons and armors that can contain new useful special effects, like triple command. Continuing, every 10 floors will face a boss that will drop an elevator key, which will allow us to go back to the floor of the last boss we faced. And luckily we'll just have to keep the last key obtained and store the others at Wayne's. One of the worst things of this dungeon is that we cannot save anywhere. We have to go back to the first floor, exit the building, and go to a save point at another place. Okay, maybe this would have been a problem on the original hardware, but on the emulator I preferred to use save states. Believe me, I tend to use classic save points, but in such cases I don't have that much will and patience. And I'm also too old for this shite. Anyway, as we ascend the floors, the random encounters will become tougher, and the armor we can find will be better. In the last tier of floors, we'll find the best armor in the game. And then, finally, well, I'll tell you frankly, if you complete this ordeal before the point of no return during the day/chapter 5, at the end of the Chrysler building, the game will allow you to face an alternative final boss, and thus see a different ending. It's a tough battle, but here's another thing. In my opinion, in all honesty, it's totally not worth it. Overall, this optional dungeon is terrible and requires at least 10 hours to be completed. The new final boss is not anything special, and the alternative ending seemed very cheap and rushed. And to make things worse, the final credits even lack the beautiful song Somnia Memories, and after that you cannot even access another New Game Plus. For that you have to reload the game and proceed to the point of no return of the main story. I felt it was all in vain. Seriously, there's no real compensation. Now, if you somehow enjoyed all this, well, I'm glad you did. But for me, it has been a waste of time. And that was my personal rant about the Chrysler building, which I would define as a false note within a great composition. And speaking of compositions, Parasite Eve boasts a great soundtrack composed by the eclectic Yoko Shinomura. The game proposes tracks of different genres that perfectly fit the overall experience that mixes mystery and horror. There's not a single piece that I would call difficult to listen or out of place. And speaking of graphics, the game is a classic mix of pre-rendered backgrounds full of details and very good models of characters and enemies, in line with the high standards of Squaresoft from those years. What amazed me in particular are the FMVs, which show the most macabre and nasty details during scenes containing body horror. It was kinda unexpected, also because I didn't know almost anything about it. I also appreciated the character design by Tetsuya Nomura. His characters are kinda realistic, and Aya looks great, especially at the beginning in the elegant dress. A real femme fatale, I would say. The monster design isn't bad either, although I found some enemies like the snakes a little uninspired, but I have to say that everything is animated very well. To conclude, Parasite Eve is definitely one of those classics worth revisiting. The mix of RPG and survival horror is fun, and the story is very intriguing, with a likable cast of characters. Aya is a well-crafted tough woman, Daniel is a tough guy ready to sacrifice himself for his loved ones, and the rest of the cast is functional to the story, but no one is superfluous. If I ever had to complain about some small issues, I would say the somewhat clunky inventory management, and also Aya's running speed, which I've always felt it was a bit slow. If I wanted to name something very strange instead, it's that after level 38, the experience points needed to level up only become 4500. Maybe it was a programmer oversight. Who knows? And that was Parasite Eve, another classic I'm glad I finally played. I hope you enjoyed the video. that maybe it even inspired you to play it, and that you didn't find my rant about the optional dungeon a bit exaggerated. As always, a warm thanks to all viewers, and see you in the next entry.